Framed by my husband and his mistress, I was locked away for 2 years. But on the day of my release, watch how I orchestrated my revenge and left them both destitute. The cell walls were damp, smelling of a mixture of old concrete, dried sweat, and rotted hope. For Eleanor, however, that wall was a giant calendar. With the tip of her rough, slightly broken thumbnail, she etched a tiny vertical line near the leg of her iron cot. The line was almost invisible if you didn't look closely, but to Eleanor it was a small mark of victory. 729 days. Tomorrow would be day 730, the day of her release. Eleanor took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the stale air of the Northgate Correctional Facility for Women. She sat cross-legged on the thin mattress that had been her home for the past 2 years. She used to sleep in a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets in a luxurious Park Avenue penthouse. She used to be the wife of Julian Mercer, a promising real estate tycoon. Now, she was just inmate number 304. The memory returned like an unstoppable tide. The flashes of journalists' cameras in the courthouse, the judge's condescending glare. And there, on the witness stand, Julian, sitting in an impeccably rolled-up white shirt, his face tilted in perfectly feigned sadness. "I loved my wife, Your Honor." Julian's voice had trembled then. "A performance worthy of an Oscar. But I cannot condone her actions. She pushed Chloe out of jealousy. She killed our future child." Then there was Chloe, Julian's personal assistant, and also his mistress, sitting in a wheelchair. Her pale, makeup-free face was deliberately crafted to look pitiable as she clutched her flat stomach. Crocodile tears streamed down her cheeks as she pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor. "Mrs. Mercer screamed at me, called me a whore. Then she shoved me down the stairs. I felt the blood." Lies. It was all lies. That day, Eleanor did go to Julian's office to confront him about the affair she had discovered, but she never touched Chloe. It was Chloe who hysterically stepped back and slipped, or perhaps threw herself down the emergency stairwell on purpose, which was only covered by a single security camera. The recording from that camera was strangely corrupted during the crucial minutes, leaving only the image of Eleanor at the top of the stairs with an enraged expression. A 2-year sentence. A felony for aggravated assault resulting in the death of a fetus. When the judge's gavel struck, Eleanor's world collapsed. She saw Julian embrace Chloe, comforting that viper. But in that embrace, Eleanor caught a second where Julian looked at her, not with guilt, but with a cold, calculating stare. The look of someone who had just eliminated the only obstacle to a multi-million-dollar inheritance. "Eleanor, daydreaming again?" A raspy voice snapped her out of her trance. It was Brenda, her cellmate, a middle-aged woman locked up for a pyramid scheme. Eleanor turned with a neutral expression. Over these 2 years, she had learned to switch off her emotions. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford in this place. "Just counting, Brenda," Eleanor replied softly. "You're getting out tomorrow. If I were you, I'd be on my knees praying until they were raw." Brenda laughed as she folded her inmate uniform. "But you're a strange one, Ellie. Too calm. Like someone going to the grocery store, not someone walking out of hell itself." Eleanor managed a faint smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because the real hell isn't in here, Brenda. The real hell is out there, waiting for me." Eleanor stood up, smoothing her blanket. "And this time, I'll be the one holding the matches." 10 a.m., visiting hours. The sound of the correctional officer's heavy footsteps echoed down the cell block. Normally, this was the most anticipated time for inmates, the hope of receiving a package from a relative or just seeing their children's faces. But for Eleanor, this hour was a test of patience. "Vance, you have a visitor." The officer, a heavy-set woman, yelled from the other side of the bars. Eleanor didn't move from her position, reading a book in a corner of the cell. She didn't even look up. "Who is it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Who do you think? Your faithful husband and his little lady," the officer mocked. Despite her harshness, the woman felt a certain sympathy for Eleanor. The whole prison knew how diligent Julian and Chloe were with their visits. To an outsider, it looked like an act of responsibility and remorse, but the officers who often saw their interactions knew something was off. "Tell them I'm sick, or dead, whatever." Eleanor responded coldly, turning a page in her book. "Ellie," Brenda whispered. It's the last month. You get out tomorrow. Why not see them one last time? Maybe they'll bring you some cash. Eleanor snapped the book shut. I don't need their money, Brenda. Besides, they don't come to give, they come to take. The officer sighed. Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Mercer says it's urgent. He says it's about your late father's assets. They're about to be seized if you don't sign today. He's brought a notary. Eleanor laughed, a dry, sharp sound. Tell the Honorable Mr. Mercer, Eleanor said, looking squarely at the officer, that my hands have stiffened up. I haven't been able to hold a pen for 2 years because I've been too busy washing inmates' laundry. If my father's assets are seized, so be it. Let it all sink. The officer shook her head, giving up. You're incredibly stubborn. Fine. I'll tell them you refuse to see them again. When the officer left, Eleanor leaned her back against the cold wall. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from contained rage. Every month for 24 months, Julian and Chloe had come. At first, they arrived with sweet talk, bringing good food, pretending to want to reconcile. Julian claimed he was forced to have her imprisoned due to public pressure and Chloe's family. But Eleanor knew that a week after she was admitted to prison, Julian tried to liquidate a certificate of deposit in her father's name worth $3 million. The bank refused because it needed Eleanor's signature as the sole heir. From that moment on, their visits turned into psychological terror. Julian would beg, then threaten. Chloe would cry, then mock. They needed that signature. Julian's business empire, which looked magnificent, was actually rotten to the core. His main capital had always come from cash injections from Eleanor's father. Without Eleanor, Julian was nothing more than the captain of a sinking ship. Just wait, Eleanor whispered into the void. You won't get my signature. You'll get me. In the air-conditioned visiting room, Julian Mercer yanked at his tie. Cold sweat beaded on his temples. She refused again? Julian asked, almost shouting when the officer returned alone. The officer nodded indifferently. She says her hands are too stiff, sir. She can't sign. That crazy woman. Chloe, sitting next to Julian, slammed her Hermes bag on the table. She's doing this on purpose. Julian, you know the company audit starts tomorrow. If we can't liquidate her father's trust fund today to cover the hole in the balance sheet, we're finished. Julian massaged the throbbing bridge of his nose. His usually handsome face now looked older than his 35 years. The last 2 years had been a logistical nightmare for him. He thought getting rid of Eleanor would make things easier. Eleanor was a submissive homemaker, or so he believed. He thought putting her in prison would break her spirit, and she'd sign anything in exchange for an early release or better conditions. But the Eleanor in prison had become a rock. She refused sentence reductions, refused privileges, and worst of all, refused to cede power over the assets of her father, Richard Vance. Even though Julian already controlled the operations of his father-in-law's company, without legal ownership of the shares, he couldn't mortgage the vital assets to get new loans. Calm down, Chloe. Don't shout in here, Julian hissed. Calm down? You're telling me to calm down? Chloe glared at him, her beautiful face distorted by panic. The Skyview project developers are already demanding the third payment. If we don't pay by next week, the project stalls and the media will smell blood in the water. Julian, and remember, she gets out tomorrow. Those words hung in the air like a poison. She gets out tomorrow. So what if she gets out? Julian tried to sound confident, though his heart faltered. She's just an ex-con. Who's going to believe her? Her reputation is destroyed. The baby killer label will follow her forever. We'll pick her up tomorrow. We'll take her home, lock her up. We'll pump her full of sedatives until she signs. Are you sure? Chloe looked at him doubtfully. She's been silent for 2 years, Julian. Her silence is scary. She's never made a scene, never begged. She's just refused. She has no one, Chloe. Her father is dead. Her fortune is locked up. Her high society friends have abandoned her. She'll walk out of here like a beggar if we don't take her in. Julian forced himself to believe. Julian stood up, adjusting his jacket. Let's go home. Let's prepare the script for tomorrow. Call the reporters. We'll create the narrative that we're a compassionate family welcoming back the wayward wife. That way, if she tries anything, the public will just think she's ungrateful. Chloe huffed but followed Julian. As they walked to the black Mercedes waiting for them, they didn't realize their seemingly perfect plan was hanging by a very thin thread, about to snap. Night fell on the prison, bringing a bone-chilling cold. In the small library, rarely visited by other inmates, Eleanor sat across from an older woman with short white hair. It was Helen Thorne, a famous former lawyer imprisoned 5 years ago, used as a scapegoat in a high-profile corruption case. Helen was Eleanor's unofficial mentor inside. "Ready for tomorrow, kid?" Helen asked. Her voice was gravelly but full of authority. Eleanor nodded. "Mentally, I'm ready, Helen. But what about the documents?" Helen smiled mysteriously, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a small smuggled USB drive. "My protege, Mason, has everything secured on the outside," Helen whispered. "He's brilliant, just like I was at his age. He's tracked the flow of funds from Julian's company. Julian was careless. He used a shell company in the Cayman Islands to launder project money, but he put his mother's name down as the director. Amateur hour." Eleanor's eyes glinted coldly. "And Chloe's medical records?" "Safe and sound," Helen replied. "Mason managed to get close to the nurse who treated Chloe. Turns out, the nurse kept a copy of the original medical history that wasn't destroyed. Chloe had a miscarriage 2 days before the stairwell incident from an overdose of illegal diet pills. She was already bleeding when she left her house that morning." Eleanor clenched her fists under the table. The truth was painful, but also liberating. She had never killed anyone. The guilt that had tormented her in the early months vanished without a trace, replaced by the smoldering embers of a vengeance burning bright. "Thank you, Helen. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Eleanor's voice trembled. Helen patted her hand. "Repay me by winning, Eleanor. Win for all of us, the ones who've been silenced by arrogant men and a corrupt system. When you walk out of here, you won't be the naive Eleanor anymore. You'll be the CEO of your own life." Helen leaned in. "Remember our strategy. Don't attack directly. Let them feel superior first. Let Julian believe he's still in control. When his guard is down, when he feels secure on his throne, that's when you pull the rug right out from under him." "First step, freeze the assets," Eleanor murmured, repeating the plan they had hatched for months. "Exactly," Helen nodded. "Based on your father's original will, the one you left in a safety deposit box at a different bank that Julian, luckily, didn't know about, you have absolute veto power. The moment you walk out and activate your status with the board of directors, every penny that leaves the company accounts will need your approval." Eleanor pictured Julian's face when his credit card was declined. A faint smile returned to her lips. "One more thing," Helen added, her face serious. "Be careful. Julian is cunning, but Chloe is reckless. Desperate people do desperate things." "I already died once 2 years ago, Helen," Eleanor replied calmly. "They can't kill someone who's already dead." On her last night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She spent it packing her few belongings, some books, a toothbrush, a change of clothes she wore when she came in, and a small, wrinkled photo of her father. She distributed the rest of her soap, shampoo, and some food among her cellmates. An emotional atmosphere enveloped cell number 12. "Don't forget about us, huh, Ellie?" Brenda said with teary eyes. "I won't," Eleanor promised. "I'll be back, not as an inmate, but as someone who will help with your case, Brenda." At dawn, Eleanor stood before the small, cracked mirror above the sink. She studied her reflection. Her hair, once long and well-kept, was now cut to shoulder length and somewhat coarse. Her skin was no longer as smooth. There was a hardness to her features. Her eyes, once soft and full of love, were now dark and deep like the ocean on a stormy night. She was no longer the sweet Mrs. Mercer, no longer Richard Vance's spoiled little girl. Prison had stripped her of all her naivety and weakness, leaving a core of indestructible steel. She touched her chest. Her heart beat steadily, without fear. There was only a sharp focus. Outside these walls, Julian and Chloe were probably sleeping soundly on a plush mattress bought with Eleanor's father's money. Or maybe they were nervously thinking about the audit. They didn't know a storm was heading their way. They thought the Eleanor who would walk out tomorrow would be a broken, shamed, and poor woman. They thought they were coming to pick up a wounded sheep. How wrong they were. The cell door would open in a few hours. Eleanor put on her old white shirt, the only decent piece of clothing she had. The shirt was now a bit loose on her thinner frame. She buttoned it up to the neck as if she were putting on armor. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for the sound of the key turning. She whispered a promise to herself, a promise that would fuel her every step from that moment on. Julian, Chloe, enjoy your lavish breakfast this morning, because it will be the last decent meal you'll be able to swallow in peace. The metallic clang of the lock echoed. The cell door swung open. The hallway lights spilled in. The game had begun. The morning sun shone brightly in the prison's outer yard, as if trying to burn away the sins locked behind the concrete walls. However, the sun's heat was outmatched by the glare of camera flashes. Julian Mercer waited by the exit gate, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark blue Armani suit. Beside him, Chloe, in a discreet ivory knee-length dress, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, held a bouquet of white roses. They looked like a couple from a Happy Family magazine, if you ignored the fact that they were waiting for Julian's ex-wife to get out of prison. "Do there have to be so many reporters?" Chloe hissed under her breath, maintaining a stiff smile for the cameras. "There have to be," Julian replied without looking at her, giving a small wave to the crowd of journalists. "We have to control the narrative from the first second she steps out. The headline has to be, 'Faithful husband welcomes repentant wife,' not 'Ex-con seeks revenge.'" Julian glanced at his watch, worth tens of thousands of dollars. His heart hammered with anxiety. He hadn't slept all night, thinking about the audit starting today. He needed Eleanor's signature before lunchtime, or the bank would start freezing his operational lines of credit. "The gate's opening!" one of the photographers shouted. The groan of the old iron gate sliding open broke the tension. All lenses focused on the dark opening. Slowly, a figure emerged. Eleanor Vance. She didn't walk with her head down, as shamed inmates often do upon release. She walked tall. Her steps were firm and measured. She wore a simple, slightly oversized white shirt and faded jeans, the same clothes she wore when she was arrested 2 years ago. Her short, shoulder-length hair framed a sharp, pale face, untouched by the sun, without makeup, without jewelry. But something was different. Her eyes. Eleanor's eyes scanned the crowd of reporters and settled on Julian and Chloe. There was no longing, no sadness, not even an explosive rage. Her gaze was empty, yet as sharp as the barrel of a rifle about to fire. Julian swallowed hard, took a step forward, and spread his arms with a moved expression he had rehearsed in the mirror. "Eleanor, darling, finally," Julian said loudly for the microphones to catch. "Welcome back. We're here for you." Chloe stepped forward behind Julian, offering the flowers with a trembling hand. "Eleanor, we've prepared your room at home. Let's start over, okay?" The cameras flashed furiously, capturing the moment of reconciliation. Eleanor stopped 2 steps away from them. She looked at the white roses as if they were a dead rat. Then she looked at Julian. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly, forming a twisted, chilling smile. She said nothing. She simply stepped to the side, walking right past Julian as if he were a lamppost in her path. "Eleanor!" Julian hissed, his voice turning sharp as he realized she was ignoring him. He grabbed her arm. "Don't make a scene. Get in the car now." The grip was strong, painful, but Eleanor didn't flinch. She looked down at Julian's hand on her arm and then up into his eyes. "Let go of me," Eleanor said quietly. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, but its coldness chilled Julian to the bone. "Or I'll scream in front of all these cameras that you're hurting me." Startled, Julian released her arm instinctively. Eleanor resumed her walk, leaving Julian and Chloe standing there with ridiculous expressions and empty hands amidst a crowd of reporters who were starting to whisper in confusion. "Where is she going? She has no one," Chloe said, panicking. Her voice started to rise, shattering the image of the elegant woman she had constructed. Eleanor kept walking toward the main road. Julian tried to follow, but his steps were halted by the soft purr of an approaching engine. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom pushed its way through the reporters. The car was ostentatiously luxurious, a stark contrast to the dusty street in front of the prison. Its license plate wasn't ordinary. It indicated that its owner had access and power. The car stopped right in front of Eleanor. A uniformed chauffeur quickly got out to open the back door for her. But it wasn't the chauffeur that made Julian's jaw drop. What froze him was the figure of a young man in an impeccable suit who got out of the passenger side and bowed respectfully to Eleanor. Mason Riley, the young Harvard-educated lawyer famous for winning impossible cases against giant corporations. Julian had tried to hire Mason for his legal team last year, but was flatly rejected. What was Mason doing here? For Eleanor. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," Mason greeted with a clear, respectful voice. "Following Mrs. Thorne's instructions, everything is ready." Eleanor gave a short nod. "Let's go, Mason." Before getting into the luxurious vehicle, she turned one last time. She saw Julian, his face red with anger and embarrassment, and Chloe, who was staring at her in disbelief. Eleanor didn't wave. She simply got into the car, and the door closed with a solid, muted thud, separating her world from theirs. The luxury car pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that hit Julian in the face. "Mr. Mercer! Mr. Mercer!" The reporters now swarmed Julian like sharks smelling blood. "Who picked up Mrs. Vance? Whose car is that? Is there a third party? Is the reconciliation off?" "No comment!" Julian barked, losing his composure. He pushed a microphone away and roughly pulled Chloe's hand. "Let's go." Inside their own luxury car, which now felt cramped and hot, Julian slammed his fist on the steering wheel. "Who was that bastard who picked her up?" he yelled. "That's Mason Riley, Julian." Chloe's voice trembled with fear. "The expensive lawyer. Where did Eleanor get the money to hire him? Her accounts are empty. We checked." "I don't know," Julian growled, starting the engine abruptly. "But wherever she goes, we have to find her. I need that signature today." Meanwhile, in the silent, cool Rolls-Royce, Eleanor leaned her head back against the soft leather seat. The scent of expensive leather and sandalwood air freshener replaced the prison's stale odor. "Where to, ma'am?" Mason asked politely from the front seat, looking at her in the rearview mirror. "To the safe house, Mason," Eleanor replied, her eyes closed. "I want to take a shower. I want to wash the last remnants of his touch off me." The safe house turned out to be a penthouse suite on the top floor of a 5-star hotel in Midtown Manhattan. This property was one of the many hidden assets of Eleanor's late father, not registered on the company books that Julian managed, but in a private trust that only Eleanor could access upon turning 30 or under certain emergency conditions. Her wrongful imprisonment had activated the emergency clause. Eleanor stood under the hot stream of water in the spacious marble bathroom. Steam filled the room. She scrubbed her skin with a rough loofah, as if trying to scrape off the layer of epidermis that had touched the prison air, that had been touched by Julian. Finally, the tears came, mixing with the water. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of release. She cried for her 2 stolen years. She cried for her father, who couldn't see her free. She cried for the child she never carried but was accused of killing. After an hour, Eleanor emerged. On the king-sized bed was a selection of new clothes prepared by Mason's team, in her size. They were no longer the pastel-toned, feminine dresses Julian liked to make Eleanor look like a submissive wife. The clothing selection was bold, modern, and powerful. Structured blazers, high-waisted trousers, silk shirts in navy blue and black, the colors of power. Eleanor chose a pristine white pantsuit with an elegant, asymmetrical cut. White, not as a symbol of purity, but as a blank canvas. Or perhaps, as the shroud for Julian's career. As she fastened the jacket, Mason knocked and entered with a thick stack of documents. "Excuse the interruption, ma'am. The notary is waiting in the living room. We need your signature for the full transfer of power over your father's holding company." Eleanor sat at the vanity, allowing a professional stylist, also arranged by Mason, to cut her hair into a sharp bob that framed her determined features. "Read me the key points, Mason," Eleanor ordered as she contemplated her new reflection in the mirror. Point 1. Mason opened a blue folder. "The power of attorney you granted to Julian Mercer 3 years ago is hereby revoked." Point 2. Your status as the majority shareholder with 90% of the shares is activated. Point 3. All assets, both liquid and real estate, in the name of the company or affiliated individuals, are frozen for a forensic audit. "Proceed," Eleanor said succinctly. "There's one more thing, ma'am." Mason hesitated for a moment. The bank has informed us that Mr. Mercer is requesting an emergency fund withdrawal of $2 million this afternoon, using a property certificate from the Hamptons as collateral. The certificate is in your name, but he holds the old power of attorney. Eleanor swiveled her chair to face Mason. Her face, now with light but firm makeup, looked formidable. "Let him request it," Eleanor said coldly. "Let him feel victorious until the very last second, then cut off his access just as he's about to swallow the bait." Eleanor stood up, slipping on a pair of blood-red stiletto heels. The sound of her steps on the marble floor echoed like the strike of a judge's gavel. "I'm done being the victim, Mason. Now show them who the real owner of all the luxury they enjoy is." While Eleanor plotted her war strategy, Julian was trying to bail water out of a sinking ship. At the Mercer Group headquarters, ironically located in a building owned by Eleanor's father, Julian paced in the boardroom. Across from him, 3 main investors looked nervous after seeing the morning's news. "Mr. Mercer," one of the investors, Mr. Garrett, cleared his throat. "This morning's news. Your wife refused to go home with you. Will this affect the dispute over the assets? We hear the land for the Miami project is still in her name." Julian laughed, a laugh too loud and forced. "Ah, Mr. Garrett, don't believe the cheap gossip. My wife, Eleanor, well, 2 years in prison have affected her mental health a bit. She was embarrassed to face the media, so she left discreetly in a car from the mental health clinic I hired. She just needs some time alone. The assets are secure." 100% secure? Another investor insisted. 100%, Julian lied smoothly. "In fact, this very afternoon I'll be signing for the liquidation of fresh funds to accelerate our project. You have nothing to worry about. Eleanor is an obedient wife. As soon as she calms down, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her." Chloe entered the room with a tray of coffee, once again playing her role as the efficient assistant. She smiled sweetly at the investors, but her eyes betrayed panic when they met Julian's. When the investors left, placated with promises, Chloe slammed the tray on the table. "Are you crazy, Julian? A mental health clinic? What if the reporters investigate? We don't even know where she is." "Shut up, Chloe," Julian barked. "I'm buying time." "The bank just called. The verification for the $2 million withdrawal is in process. As soon as the money is in our account, we pay the suppliers, secure our position, and then we find Eleanor. If we have to, we'll hire some thugs to bring her home." Julian's phone buzzed, a notification from the bank. Verification process in its final stage. Julian sighed in relief. "See? The old power of attorney still works. Eleanor is a fool. She didn't go straight to a notary when she got out. She must be crying in some corner." "We have to celebrate tonight, Julian," Chloe said, starting to calm down. "To ease our nerves and to show the public we're not worried. Let's have dinner at the Pinnacle Room. Invite some high society friends." "Good idea," Julian nodded, adjusting his tie. His confidence was slowly returning. He felt he was still in control. He had always won against the weak Eleanor. Why would this time be any different? They didn't realize that across town, a legal notice was being sent by courier to that bank's headquarters, a notice on the letterhead of Mason Riley and Associates, attaching a newly notarized deed signed just 5 minutes ago. The Pinnacle Room restaurant was buzzing that night with New York's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow. Soft jazz music floated through the air. Julian and Chloe were seated at the best table in the center of the room. Chloe wore a new evening gown she had bought that afternoon on the company credit card, of course. They were surrounded by 2 other couples, business partners they were trying to impress. "So it's true Eleanor has mental issues?" asked Mrs. Lexington, a socialite fond of gossip. Chloe put on a look of feigned sadness. "Yes, darling, it's such a shame. This morning she didn't even recognize Julian. She was hallucinating. The doctor says she needs intensive treatment. We're so worried." "You're saints," Mrs. Lexington's husband praised them. "Still taking care of the woman who tried to kill your child." Julian smiled humbly, raising his wineglass. "Family is family, sir. I could never abandon Eleanor. Let's toast to a better future." The glasses clinked. Julian felt victorious. The narrative was under control. The money would arrive tomorrow morning. Life was getting back to normal. "Excuse me, sir." A waiter approached with a card machine to charge for an extra bottle of Dom Perignon and the dinner bill. Julian casually pulled out his corporate Black Platinum card. The card was linked directly to the main company account, with an unlimited limit. "Go ahead," Julian said without looking at the bill. The waiter inserted the card, waited a moment, then frowned. He tried again. "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined," the waiter whispered politely. The laughter at the table died down. Julian's face flushed. "Impossible. Try it again. Maybe your machine is broken." The waiter tried once more. A long, painful beep sounded. "Still declined, sir. The reason is contact issuer." "Use mine." Chloe quickly pulled out her credit card, an additional card from the same account. The result was the same. Declined. Cold sweat began to run down Julian's back. The guests started to look at each other uncomfortably. "Maybe there's a problem with the bank's system." Julian tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow. "One moment, I'll call finance." Julian stepped away from the table, his hands trembling as he dialed the number of his company's CFO. "Hello, Mr. Ramsey. Why aren't the corporate cards working? Did you forget to pay the bill?" Julian barked in a whisper. On the other end of the line, Mr. Ramsey's voice sounded panicked and breathless. "Mr. Mercer, I was just about to call you. It's a disaster, sir. All of the company's accounts have been frozen." "What do you mean frozen?" "An order just came in from the SEC and the Federal Reserve. There's an instruction for a total block at the request of the new majority shareholder, based on a clause of asset mismanagement. And sir, the $2 million we requested this afternoon, the transaction has been automatically canceled." Julian's world spun. New majority shareholder? Who? "Mrs. Eleanor Vance, sir," Mr. Ramsey replied quietly. "Her notary just sent the minutes of the change in the company's structure. You were dismissed as CEO at 5 p.m. this afternoon. All your access has been revoked." Julian dropped the phone. He turned toward the restaurant's large picture window. Across the street, a giant screen that usually displayed cosmetic ads suddenly switched. It was a breaking news alert. On the screen, Eleanor's face, beautiful, firm, and powerful, was at a podium giving a press conference. The volume on the restaurant's bar TV was turned up by other patrons. "I, Eleanor Vance, as the legitimate owner of the Vance Group, today announce a complete restructuring of the management. We have found evidence of massive misappropriation of funds over the past 2 years. As of today, I am assuming full control and will take legal action against the parties who have harmed the company." On the screen, Eleanor looked directly into the camera as if she were looking straight into the eyes of Julian, who stood paralyzed inside the lavish restaurant, unable to pay his bill. All eyes in the restaurant turned to Julian and Chloe. The whispers of admiration for the saintly family turned into looks of scorn and mockery. Julian felt his knees buckle. It wasn't just a declined credit card. It was checkmate. And Eleanor had just made her first move. The next morning, New York woke up to an explosion, not of a bomb, but of information that destroyed a reputation in seconds. In her penthouse, Eleanor enjoyed a cup of chamomile tea while looking at her tablet. Mason sat across from her, smiling with satisfaction. #1 trending topic on X, Instagram, and TikTok, Mason reported. The hashtags Justice for Eleanor and Honor Mercer Reed scandal have already hit 2 million mentions in an hour. Eleanor swiped her finger across the screen. An anonymous account managed by Mason's investigative team had released an explosive file. It wasn't just rumors. It was a high-resolution scan of the original medical record from Mercy General Hospital, dated September 23rd, 2 days before the stairwell incident that sent Eleanor to prison. The document clearly read, "Patient, Chloe Reed, diagnosis, spontaneous incomplete abortion due to consumption of hazardous chemical substances, dietary supplements. Procedure, emergency D&C, September 23rd, 11:45 p.m. The document proved that when Chloe fell down the stairs on September 25th, her uterus was already empty. There was no baby for Eleanor to have killed. Only the drama of a manipulative woman who used her own miscarriage to get rid of the legitimate wife. Across town, in the luxurious villa that once belonged to Eleanor, the atmosphere was tense. Julian smashed his phone against the wall, shattering the screen. His breathing was ragged, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Chloe, who was huddled on the sofa, her face as pale as wax. "Explain it to me." Julian's voice was low, trembling with an anger about to erupt. "Explain to me why that medical record says you miscarried 2 days before Eleanor came to the office." It's fake, Julian. Eleanor forged it." Chloe tried to deny, but her voice broke. "Don't lie to me anymore," Julian screamed, striding over and grabbing her by the shoulders. "I just called the hospital director. He's terrified. He says the file is authentic and that it was stolen by a nursing intern. So it's true. You had already lost the baby because of your damned diet pills. And then you faked a fall to send Eleanor to prison?" Chloe burst into hysterical sobs. "I was scared, Julian. At the time you said that if I was pregnant you would divorce Eleanor. But then I had the miscarriage. I was afraid you would leave me if you knew the baby was gone. Then Eleanor showed up, furious. I saw an opportunity. I thought if Eleanor went to jail, we could be happy forever." Julian let go of her, stepping back as if he had just touched something infectious. The betrayal left him speechless. For 2 years, he had lived convinced he was doing the right thing, seeking justice for his dead child. That conviction justified all his cruelty toward Eleanor, but it turned out he was just a pawn in Chloe's twisted game. He had imprisoned his loyal wife for a liar. "Julian, we have to deny it. Let's hire a lawyer. Pay off influencers," Chloe pleaded, crawling to hug his legs. "With what money?" Julian yelled in frustration. "My accounts are frozen, Chloe. My cards don't work. And now everyone knows you're a liar and I'm the idiot husband who jailed his innocent wife." The insistent ringing of the doorbell interrupted their argument. It wasn't a guest's ring, but a long, demanding one. Julian looked at the security monitor. In front of the high gate of the house were 2 police cars, a moving truck, and, in the middle of it all, the figure that chilled his blood. Eleanor had come. The automatic gate swung open, not because Julian pressed the button, but because Eleanor's team had hacked the security system. Eleanor walked into the garden of her childhood home. The modern colonial-style house with its majestic white pillars looked the same, but the atmosphere was different. The grass was too perfect. There were new, tacky statues in the garden, undoubtedly Chloe's taste. Behind Eleanor walked Mason, 4 police officers, and 2 court officials. The front door flew open. Julian stormed out, his face contorted, followed by a still sobbing Chloe. "What the hell is this, Eleanor?" Julian shouted, trying to maintain the scraps of his authority in front of the police. "You can't just barge in like this. This is still my house." Eleanor stopped on the first step of the porch. She looked up at Julian from a lower position, but somehow Julian felt tiny. "Your house?" Eleanor asked quietly. She turned to Mason. "Mason, please read property certificate number 405 and the 2018 deed of gift." Mason opened his leather folder. "The land and building are registered in the name of Eleanor Vance. An absolute gift from Mr. Richard Vance. There is no community property clause, as it was acquired before the marriage and has the status of separate property. Based on this morning's provisional court order, the legitimate owner requests the immediate eviction from the property, as the current occupants do not have permission to reside here." Julian's face turned ashen. "But I'm your husband. This is our house." "Soon-to-be ex-husband," Eleanor corrected coldly. "And to be clear, Julian, it's my house. You've just been a guest who overstayed his welcome and started stealing the silverware." Eleanor gestured to the officials. "Take their things out. Only clothing and personal items. All furniture, paintings, electronics, and jewelry bought with company money stay here for the audit." "You can't do this!" Chloe screamed. She tried to lunge at Eleanor, but a female police officer firmly stopped her. "I am the lady of this house." Eleanor looked at Chloe with a gaze that froze the blood. "You are not a lady, Chloe. You are just a parasite that landed on the wrong host," Eleanor said. "You have 30 minutes to pack your bags, or I'll have my men throw them onto the street." "Eleanor." Julian looked at her, searching for any trace of the sweet woman he once knew. The woman who always made his coffee in the morning, who massaged his feet when he was tired. That woman was dead. "Eleanor." Julian's voice softened, his last attempt at manipulation. "We can talk about this calmly inside, not in front of the police. Ellie, I know I was wrong. But Chloe tricked me with the pregnancy. I'm a victim too, Ellie. Eleanor laughed, a short, empty laugh. Victim? Eleanor took a step forward, bringing her face close to Julian's. You're not a victim, Julian. You're a greedy man who preferred to believe his mistress over the wife who stood by you for 10 years. You don't regret that Chloe lied. You regret that you got caught. She turned around, giving them her back. You have 25 minutes left. For every minute you're late, one of your bags will be burned. Julian and Chloe had no choice. Under police supervision, they ran to their room, frantically stuffing clothes into suitcases. Julian tried to grab his Rolex from a drawer, but an official stopped him. Sorry, sir. That's registered as a company asset from last year. It's being confiscated. Half an hour later, Julian and Chloe stood on the sidewalk outside the gate. 2 large suitcases and several handbags lay at their feet. The gate slowly closed in front of them. Neighbors began to come out to witness the drama, whispering. Julian Mercer, the successful CEO, was now on the street like a high-class vagrant. From the master bedroom window on the 2nd floor, Eleanor watched them. She didn't feel happy, she just felt clean. The house could finally breathe again. The next day, the battlefield moved to the Vance Tower, a 40-story skyscraper in the financial district. At 9 a.m., the main boardroom on the top floor was filled with the board of directors and minority shareholders. The atmosphere was tense. The coffee served remained untouched. The double doors opened. Eleanor Vance entered, flanked by Mason and Helen Thorne, who was now on parole and had joined as Eleanor's lead legal counsel. Eleanor wore a jet black pantsuit. Her bob was perfectly styled. She walked to the chair at the head of the table, the chair Julian had occupied for 2 years. She sat down, placing her hands on the marble table. Good morning, she greeted. Her voice was calm, but commanded the room. Apologies for the chaos of the last 2 days. We are here to take out the trash. Suddenly, the boardroom door was forced open. Julian burst in, dodging the security trying to stop him. He was still wearing the wrinkled suit from the day before. I am still the legitimate CEO of this company, Julian shouted breathlessly. This meeting is not valid without my presence. I built this company over the past 2 years while she was in prison. Built? Eleanor arched an eyebrow. She pressed a button on the projector remote. A graph appeared on the giant screen. A red line plummeted downwards. During your 2 years of leadership, Julian, Eleanor began her presentation as if Julian were an incompetent intern. Net profits fell by 40%. Short-term debt increased by 200%. And most interestingly, Eleanor pressed another button. A list of suspicious transactions appeared. There was a fund flow of $1 million to a company called Vi Interior Design, a shell company owned by Chloe Reed. For what? Interior design consulting services, Eleanor read in a mocking tone. What interior design costs $1 million? Remodeling hell. The shareholders muttered restlessly. Julian's face paled. He knew those funds. It was the money he had used to buy Chloe an apartment and a luxury car, without it being traced as a personal asset. It was a business diversification strategy. Julian tried to excuse himself, but his voice was weak. It's embezzlement, Julian. Helen cut him off sharply. And since you did it in your official capacity, the penalty is enhanced. Eleanor stood up. As the holder of 90% of the voting shares, I exercise my right. The only item on today's agenda is the dismissal of Julian Mercer as CEO with dishonorable discharge and the filing of a lawsuit for damages for all company losses. Agreed, exclaimed one of the oldest board members, who had long hated Julian's arrogant leadership style. Agreed, the others chorused. Julian stood frozen in the middle of the room. He looked around for an ally, but the people who used to flatter him, who laughed with him on the golf course, now averted their gaze. In the business world, there are no eternal friends, only interests, and Julian no longer had any value. Security, Eleanor called calmly. Please escort Mr. Mercer out and ensure he takes nothing but the remnants of his dignity, if he has any left. 2 burly security guards grabbed Julian's arms. He resisted weakly, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. You're cruel, Ellie, Julian whispered. I learned from the best, Eleanor replied without blinking. The door closed. Julian was ejected from his own kingdom. Inside, Eleanor sat back down. All right. Gentlemen, let's talk about how we're going to save this ship, Eleanor said, opening a new chapter for her father's company. Room 204 of the Crossroads Motel was small. It smelled of stale tobacco, and the air conditioner rattled like an old tractor. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, its springs digging into him, staring blankly at the peeling wall. On the floor, his luxury suitcases filled with designer clothes were piled up, looking ridiculous in the grimy room. It had been 3 days since they were kicked out. The credit cards didn't work. The cash Julian had left in his wallet was barely $300, a pittance for someone who used to spend that on a single dinner. His Mercedes had been repossessed by the finance company the previous evening. It turned out Julian hadn't made a payment in 3 months. The money had been diverted to cover Chloe's lifestyle. "It's so hot in here, I can't sleep," Chloe complained. She had just come out of the bathroom where the faucet dripped incessantly. "Stop complaining," Julian muttered without turning. "Stop complaining?" Chloe exploded. She threw a wet towel in Julian's face. "This is all your fault. You said you were a business genius. You said Eleanor's assets were under your control. And what happened? You're just a puppet. Without Eleanor's signature, you're nothing." Julian roughly pushed the towel away, stood up, and shoved Chloe against the cheap wooden wardrobe. "My fault?" Julian yelled, his eyes bloodshot. "Do you own a mirror?" "This all fell apart because of your lie, Chloe. If you hadn't faked the fall, if you hadn't put on that dirty show, Eleanor wouldn't have gone to prison. We probably would have divorced amicably. I would have gotten part of the community property and we'd still be rich. But no, you got greedy. You wanted to see her destroyed. And now look who's destroyed." "I did it for us," Chloe retorted, screaming through her tears. "I love you, you idiot." "Love?" Julian laughed bitterly. "You loved my credit card. You loved the status of Mrs. Mercer. Now that I have nothing, do you still love me?" Chloe fell silent. Her eyes darted around nervously, avoiding Julian's gaze. A painful silence filled the room. Chloe's unsaid answer was more hurtful than a slap. "I knew it," Julian hissed, sitting back down and burying his face in his hands. "Julian," Chloe's voice changed, becoming calculating. "We can sell my jewelry, my bags. They're still valuable. We can flee the country, go to Mexico or Canada." "Our passports are flagged, Chloe," Julian said wearily. "A friend in law enforcement told me. Eleanor moved fast. We're under surveillance waiting for the subpoena." Chloe slumped to the floor. Her face was pale. The image of prison, the place she laughed about when she visited Eleanor, now haunted her. She imagined a narrow cell, stale food, and a cold floor. "I don't want to go to jail, Julian," she sobbed. "Do something. Call Eleanor. Beg for forgiveness. She loved you. She was a lovesick fool. There must be a way." "She's not a fool anymore," Julian replied, staring blankly out the barred window. "She's a monster we created." The sound of a police siren wailed in the distance. To both of them, it sounded like an approaching funeral bell. Mason Riley and Associates was a hive of activity. Stacks of documents piled up on the conference table. Eleanor signed the last page of a 2-inch thick file. "There it is," Mason said, closing the red folder. "The petition for sentence review before the Supreme Court. The new evidence, the NB for no-brainer, is rock solid," Helen added, sipping her coffee. "The original medical record, the nurse's testimony, who finally decided to talk for fear of being implicated, and the recording from the missing security camera, which the former head of security, fired by Julian, kept a copy of." Yes, Eleanor had tracked down the head of security. It turned out Julian had fired him without severance a week after the incident. Resentful, the man kept a copy of the hard drive as a life insurance policy. The recording clearly showed Eleanor and Chloe were 6 feet apart. Chloe glanced toward the camera and then deliberately let herself fall with the technique of an amateur stunt performer. "With this evidence," Mason continued, "your conviction will be overturned. The state will have to restore your good name, and history will record that you were never guilty." "That's for the past," Eleanor said calmly. "Now for the future." Mason handed her a second, black folder. "Police complaint number LPB 098122025, Mason read. "Defendants Julian Mercer and Chloe Reed. Charges, article, Perjury, article. False accusation and malicious prosecution, article. Falsifying annual accounts and violations of the Money Laundering Control Act. Accumulated sentence? Eleanor asked. For Julian, with the embezzlement and money laundering, it could be up to 15 years, Helen answered. For Chloe, as the mastermind of the plot that sent an innocent person to prison, the judges will be very severe, maybe 7 to 9 years. Eleanor looked at her signature on the letterhead. The black ink was still fresh. She once signed the marriage registry with a hand trembling with happiness. Now, she signed the death warrant for her ex-husband's life with a steady hand. Send it, Eleanor ordered. Now? Mason asked. Now, Eleanor replied. I want them to receive it while they're eating instant noodles in that disgusting motel. I want them to choke on reality. Mason nodded and handed the file to his assistant to take to the police station. Eleanor walked to the office window overlooking the New York skyline. The sky was overcast, but to her it seemed clear. Justice is slow, Eleanor murmured. Helen stood beside her, putting an arm around her student and client's shoulders. It's slow, kid, but it has a very cruel sense of humor. When it arrives, it hits where it hurts the most. Helen? Eleanor smiled faintly. They took 2 years from me. I'll take the rest of their lives from them. Eleanor's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Eleanor, help me. Julian hit me. I want to be a protected witness. I have more evidence about the bribe Julian paid the judge. Meet me. Chloe. Eleanor showed the message to Helen and Mason. Just as you suspected, Helen, Eleanor said coolly. The rats are starting to eat each other when the ship sinks. What are you going to reply? Helen asked. Eleanor typed a brief response and turned off her phone. Eleanor's reply, save your story for the police, I don't care. A torrential downpour fell on New York that afternoon, as if the sky were crying, or perhaps washing away the city's sins. In the lobby of the Vance Tower, the atmosphere was silent despite it being closing time. Employees who normally rushed out now walked slowly. Their gazes were fixed on one spot in the middle of the grand marble lobby. There, kneeling, was a man they once feared and respected. Julian Mercer, his shirt poorly buttoned and his hair disheveled, was on his knees on the floor. He didn't care about the whispers of the employees he once yelled at, nor the security guards who watched him with a mixture of pity and disgust. His gaze was fixed only on the VIP elevator door, which had just opened. Eleanor stepped out. The sound of her stiletto heels echoed. Click, clack, click, rhythmic, like the ticking of a death clock. She wore a black trench coat, elegant and untouchable. Beside her, Mason was on alert, but Eleanor raised a hand, signaling him to stay back. Julian crawled on his knees toward her. Eleanor. Julian's voice was hoarse, broken by a restrained sob. Eleanor, help me. They're looking for me. The police are outside. Eleanor stopped 6 feet away from Julian. She looked at her ex-husband, not with anger, but with the gaze of a scientist observing a dying insect. Get up, Julian, Eleanor said in a flat voice. You're in the way. Forgive me, Ellie. I was wrong. I was a fool. Julian prostrated himself, his forehead touching the cold marble. That woman bewitched me. Chloe planned everything. She forced me to bribe the judge. She faked the evidence. I still love you, Eleanor. Remember our 10 years of marriage. Remember when we started from nothing. Eleanor laughed softly, a cold, piercing laugh. Started from nothing? She repeated. Correction, Julian, I started from nothing. You were just the handsome passenger. And about love. You don't love me. You miss my credit card. You miss the power of my signature. You miss the security I gave you. No. I swear to God. Don't bring God into this, Eleanor cut him off sharply. She bent down slightly so her eyes were level with Julian's red-rimmed ones. 2 years ago, when I knelt at your feet begging you to believe me when I told you I hadn't pushed Chloe, what did you do? You pushed me away. You spit in my face and let the police drag me away. Julian fell silent. His body trembled violently. The memory hit him. Now, Eleanor whispered, you're feeling 1,000th of my desperation back then. Enjoy it. It's my farewell gift. Eleanor stood up straight and addressed the head of security. "Mr. Garcia, please clean up this mess and allow the police officers outside to enter." "Eleanor, no! Eleanor!" Julian tried to grab her leg, but two guards held him firmly. From the lobby's revolving door, 4 uniformed police officers entered, handcuffs in hand. "Julian Mercer," a police officer said firmly, "you are under arrest for suspected crimes of money laundering, embezzlement, and perjury." Click! The sound of the handcuffs closing. Eleanor didn't turn back. She walked to her waiting car, leaving Julian behind as he was dragged out, accompanied by the flashes of the reporters' cameras waiting at the door. The interrogation room at the precinct was cold and smelled of stale coffee. On one side of the metal table, Chloe Reed sat with trembling hands, clutching a plastic cup. Her usually radiant face was now dull. Her eyes were swollen. Across from her, a seasoned inspector stared at her while Mason, present as the complainant's lawyer, watched from behind a one-way mirror in the adjacent room. "Ms. Reed," the inspector said, "the medical evidence is conclusive. You faked a pregnancy and a miscarriage to send Mrs. Vance to prison. The penalty is 7 years, but you could get a reduction if you cooperate in uncovering a larger case." Chloe swallowed hard. She knew it was her only way out. Julian was finished. There was no point in being loyal to a sinking ship. "What guarantee do I have, Inspector?" she asked quietly. "We will recommend you as a cooperating witness to the district attorney. Your sentence will be reduced," the inspector replied. "We need evidence of Julian's involvement in bribing the judge at the trial 2 years ago." Chloe took a deep breath and rummaged through her purse, which had been confiscated, but she was allowed to access its contents. She pulled out a small pink USB drive. "Julian thinks he's so smart," Chloe said, her voice starting to sound bitter and vengeful. "He deleted all the chats and emails, but he forgot something. I handled the transfers. I always made backups of everything as insurance for my future." The inspector took the drive and plugged it into a laptop. The screen displayed a series of cryptocurrency transfers and recordings of phone conversations. Julian's voice recorded, "Listen, the judge needs another 100 grand for the maximum sentence. Take it from the company's marketing funds. Eleanor needs to be in jail for at least 2 years to give me time to transfer the Miami properties." Chloe's voice recorded, "But that's risky, honey." Julian's voice, "Just do it. Or do you want us to end up poor? As soon as she's in that cell, we'll be king and queen." Behind the mirror, Eleanor, who had just entered, stood frozen. She had suspected Julian was evil, but hearing her ex-husband so coldly plot her destruction was still painful. "Son of a bitch," Mason hissed beside her. In the interrogation room, Chloe continued her betrayal. "And that's not all, Inspector," Chloe added, her eyes glinting with malice. Julian also ordered someone to cut the brakes on Eleanor's former lawyer's car so he couldn't attend the first appeal hearing. "I have the chats with the thug he hired." The inspector was stunned. The case was expanding from domestic fraud to organized crime and attempted murder. "That's enough," the inspector said, closing the laptop. "This is enough to put Julian in prison for life." Chloe smiled in relief, thinking she had saved herself. "Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Reed," the inspector said coldly. "Your status is now officially that of a detainee and defendant. We will submit your request for cooperation, but remember, you are still the mastermind of the fake miscarriage. Don't expect to walk free." Chloe's smile vanished. But I helped. Helping uncover another crime doesn't erase your own," the inspector stated. "Take her to the holding cells." As Chloe was led out, she passed Julian being escorted to the next room. Their eyes met. There was no love, only the pure hatred of two predators devouring each other. 3 months later, in the New York Supreme Court, the courtroom was packed. The case had become the trial of the year. The public, outraged by the injustice Eleanor had suffered, filled the area around the courthouse with signs of support. Eleanor sat in the front row. She looked serene, dressed entirely in white. Beside her, Helen squeezed her hand tightly. The presiding judge, not the same one as before. The previous one had been disbarred and was now also a defendant, banged his gavel to begin reading the verdict. Julian and Chloe sat at the defendant's table, separated by 2 police officers. Julian looked gaunt. His hair had gone gray. His eyes were sunken. Chloe kept her head down, crying silently. The court has reached a verdict. The judge's voice boomed. Eleanor's heart pounded. The moment of truth. The defendant, Julian Mercer, is found guilty of the crimes of bribery, money laundering, and fraud causing harm to third parties. The judge took a deep breath. The defendant is hereby sentenced to a term of 15 years in prison and a fine of $3 million, with an additional personal liability of 1 year in prison in case of non-payment. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Julian slumped in his chair as if his spine had been ripped out. 15 years. He would get out at 50, with no money, no family, an old ex-con. And the defendant, Chloe Reed, the judge continued. Chloe looked up, hoping her cooperating status would help. Is found guilty of the crimes of perjury and false accusation resulting in the deprivation of liberty of a person. Although the defendant has acted as a cooperating witness, considering her active role and malicious intent as the instigator of the deceit, the defendant is hereby sentenced to a term of 6 years in prison. Chloe screamed hysterically. No, it's not fair. It was Julian who forced me. 6 years. Take her out of here, the judge ordered. Julian didn't scream. He just turned to find Eleanor in the crowd. Eleanor didn't look away. She met his gaze directly and nodded slowly. A full stop. As Julian was led away through a side door, he saw Eleanor standing, surrounded by the flashes of cameras, smiling. A real smile for the first time in 3 years. Julian realized it was the last time he would see the light of day. A year later, Eleanor stood on a large plot of land on the outskirts of New York. Behind her, a new, pleasant, and modern building had just been completed. A sign at the entrance read, "The Justice Bloom Foundation, Center for Legal Aid and Women's Empowerment." "It's beautiful." "Ma'am," said Mason, who was beside her. Mason was no longer just her lawyer, but also the COO of the foundation. "This is just the beginning, Mason," Eleanor replied, smiling. "This building will be a home for voiceless women. Women like me, silenced by the system and their partners." Eleanor had sold the Mercer Group. She wanted nothing to do with a real estate business filled with bad memories of Julian. With the money from the sale, plus Julian's assets that the state returned to her as compensation, she built the foundation and invested in green technologies, a quieter sector. The name Eleanor Vance was now known as that of a philanthropist and activist, not as Julian's ex-wife or a victim. She had rewritten her own identity. That afternoon, Eleanor went to the cemetery. She placed a bouquet of lilies on her father's grave. "Dad," Eleanor whispered, caressing the headstone. "It's all over. Your fortune is back and being used for good. Our name is clean." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees. Eleanor felt a sense of peace. The revenge that once burned in her chest had been extinguished, replaced by a vast, serene relief. She no longer lived to destroy Julian, she lived for herself. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Monthly visit. Eleanor smirked. There was one last thing she had to do to close the circle perfectly. Stonegate Penitentiary. The atmosphere in the visiting room was noisy, but to Eleanor, it felt silent. She sat on a cold metal chair, separated by thick glass and bars. A familiar position, but now the roles were reversed. The door opposite opened. Julian entered, escorted by an officer. He looked pitiful. He had only been in prison for a year, but he looked 10 years older. His head was shaved due to lice. His face was rough and dark, with a scar on his temple, probably from a fight. His aura of arrogance was gone, replaced by the pleading look of a beaten dog. Julian sat down. He looked at Eleanor with teary eyes, as if seeing a saving angel. He picked up the receiver of the phone with trembling hands. Eleanor calmly lifted hers. "Eleanor." Julian's voice sounded distorted in Eleanor's ear. "Thank you for coming, I knew you would. You still care about me, right?" Eleanor remained silent, letting Julian talk. "This is hell, Ellie." Julian began to cry. "They beat me. The food is garbage. I can't take it anymore, Ellie. Please help me, file an appeal. You have connections now. Or at least send me money. My commissary account is at 0. I'm starving. Eleanor looked at this man, the man she once adored, the man who threw her into a place like this without remorse. I didn't come to save you, Julian. Eleanor's voice was clear and calm. Then, Julian was stunned. Eleanor took a brown envelope from her bag and pressed it against the glass. This is a copy of our final divorce decree and the settlement of community property. The court has decided that since you were the cause of the divorce and committed a crime against your wife, you receive not a single cent. Julian's face fell. The hope of money vanished. And one more thing, Eleanor continued. I came to return this. Eleanor took out the white gold wedding ring Julian had given her, the ring she had kept in the deepest drawer. The officer will give it to you later, Eleanor said. Sell it. Maybe it will get you enough to buy cigarettes and noodles for a month at the commissary. Eleanor, don't do this, Julian sobbed. I'm your husband. I'm sorry. Eleanor stood up, adjusting her jacket. You used to visit me every month hoping I would break and give up, Eleanor said, staring into Julian's eyes through the glass. Today, I came to make sure you see that I am whole, happy, and that I have won. Eleanor, wait! When will you be back? Julian shouted desperately as Eleanor began to turn away. Don't leave me alone, Eleanor. Eleanor paused for a moment and turned slightly. There will be no more visits, Julian. This is the last one. Enjoy the rest of your life in the box you built for yourself. Eleanor hung up the phone. The connection was cut. Behind the glass, Julian screamed without sound, banging on the glass, begging, crying. But Eleanor was already gone. The heavy iron gate opened, letting the bright sunlight welcome her. She took a deep breath, inhaling the true air of freedom. No burdens, no past. Eleanor walked to her car, where Mason was waiting with a smile. She got in, and the vehicle slowly pulled away, leaving the grim prison building further and further behind, until it became a small dot that finally disappeared in the rearview mirror. The flower had bloomed completely, and the iron bars had only been the fertilizer that made it stronger.